As I look about my native city, I have a distinct sense that we are living in a pre-revolutionary time. The race war grows more intense, poverty more severe, the rich richer. The hatred of those inside the fabled Beltway for those outside is now, what else? Creating a true hatred on the part of the many for the few who govern, or appear to do so, since the decision makers and paymasters are beyond our reach in the boardrooms of the world. I like to watch the Sunday Zoo on television when journalists and politicians talk nonsense. No problem is ever addressed, but there's a lot of talk about process, a near meaningless word in these parts. Recently, I watched the director of the budget babble to those distinguished receivers of conventional wisdom, Professors Evans and Novak. What to do about the budget? To my amazement, the defense budget was actually mentioned by Mr. Evans. Apparently, the Brookings Institute thought that a few $100s might be cut. But although the defense budget is the cancer that is killing our body politic, it cannot be dealt with by the media. And the director of the budget, one of my favorite characters on television, was swift to create a diversion. Entitlements, he wrote. He moaned, if only we could get them on the table. He shook his head in despair at the trillions of dollars that we waste on free dentures and profligate unwed mothers. Now, it is wonderfully ironic for anyone to complain about people programs, because wasteful or not, there are not very many of them. But you can't point this out on television because both journalists and politicians are hired by the same people, and back of those people is the corporate wealth of the country. The budget is always faked, and no one ever questions it. The famous entitlements consist largely of disbursements for Social Security, and Social Security contributions are always counted as a part of the federal revenue. But Social Security is a separate trust fund whose income and outgo has nothing to do with the actual budget. Theoretically, on paper, Social Security is a profitable trust fund. Actually, all of our contributions have been transformed into government bonds, so many IOUs that are not going to be redeemed in any foreseeable American future. Yet why, for years now, does the government pretend that Social Security payments are part of its annual revenue? Well, they do so because if you took it out of the budget, you would then see that perhaps 90% of the federal income over the years has been spent on war-related matters or on servicing the debt on money borrowed for war. Incidentally, a statistic I have not yet checked, but I just heard that for the first time in 1990, the cost of servicing the debt was equal to the amount of money appropriated for the Pentagon. Although there has been no war declared since 1941, at regular intervals, the National Security Council can be relied upon to create a diversionary light show in Iraq or an illegal invasion of a weak country like Panama. In any case, if you don't count Social Security payments as revenue, Bush is currently spending $1.2 trillion a year while taking in only $800 billion from our taxes. So the real deficit is about $450 billion. That makes the total national debt close to $4 trillion. In 1980, it was a mere $1 trillion. It is true that the Pentagon itself gets less money these days than it used to, but foreign aid, nuclear energy, debt service, payments to the true victims of our wars, our veterans, still account for most of federal expenditures and deficits. I seem to recall that 3 years ago, opinion makers here in town were mildly interested in overruns of the Defense Department. There was to be an investigation, you remember, and John Tower was going to be the point man. He'd be in place to make sure that nothing untoward was discovered. But Cheney got the job instead, and there have been no meaningful investigations on his watch. I love the phrases around here, on my watch. Do you notice how they keep saying, this president? No, this president. I thought at first it was Nancy Reagan, of course, kept talking about this president. They all do. In my day, it was the president. The savings and loan bailout is probably not possible, as the Japanese and the Germans are no longer willing to finance so feckless and corrupt a political and economic system as ours. The entire cost of World War II in current dollars, and that includes service-connected veteran benefits, was about $460 billion. The cost of bailing out the S&Ls will be at least $500 billion, or $40 billion more than the entire cost of World War II. We have been robbed, all of us. It is a commonplace that half of those qualified to vote for president don't vote. Also, that half the adult population never reads a newspaper. No bad thing all in all. Assuming that they could read a newspaper, which is moot, as the public schools now rank last in the first world, while our prison population, symmetrically, is the highest, surpassing at last South Africa and the Soviet Union, or whatever they call it today. We have also passed Iraq and Iran as the #1 executor of minors. Because the ownership of the country has never liked the idea of political parties, we have only one, divided into two sections, the Democrats and the Republicans. Every 4 years, the naive are encouraged to believe that if we can elect a really nice man or woman president, everything's going to be all right. But it won't be. Any individual who is able to raise $25 million to be considered presidential is not going to be much use to the people at large. He will represent oil or aerospace or banking or cut the capital gains tax. The only thing Bush has had to say for 3 years, well, that was the price of getting the money to be elected. Certainly such a candidate will never represent the people of the country, and they know it. Hence the sense of despair throughout the land as incomes fall and businesses fail, and there is no redress. Before the national security state, for those of you my age, was invented, we had something called representative government. It didn't work awfully well, but at least there was some sense that from time to time something might be done about, let's say, the Depression, the sort of thing that now cannot be done by a system where all the public revenues are earmarked for weaponry and war and secret police forces, and now the servicing of some $3 to $4 trillion worth of debt. But enough of gloom and doom and cheerlessness. We are lucky in so troubled a time that we can take pride in the fact that the United States has more lawyers than the rest of the world put together. There are 756,000, to be precise, of whom Mr. Bush assured us that Clarence Thomas was the best, and I think he was right. What to do? When we suffer or are exposed to the same miseries by a government which we might expect in a country without government, our calamity is heightened by reflecting that we furnish the means by which we suffer. Government, like dress, is the badge of lost innocence. The palaces of kings are built upon the bowers of paradise. Naturally, you will all recognize those words from Common Sense by Thomas Paine. How do we get rid of this bad government? There is certainly no road back to Eden in any society. And even if we could return, our own Eden was a most mixed affair, based as it was on the enslavement of Africans and the slaughter or deportation of an indigenous population. But until 1950 and our ramshackle world empire, we were improving ourselves, and the generality took part in government while opinion was not so cynically and totally manipulated as now. Since we cannot pay for the empire any longer, we shall soon be coming home. But to what? Our inalienable rights are being systematically alienated. Never has an American government been so busy interfering in the private lives of its citizens, subjecting them to mandatory blood, urine, lie detector tests. Yet the famous war on drugs has nothing at all to do with drugs. It is part of an all-out war on the American people by a government interested only in control. As this grows more evident, I suspect that we shall begin to see an organized resistance to so tyrannous a state. If we had political parties, there might be some control over the executive with its numerous secret police. But we have no political parties. We have no politics. Only mindless, issueless elections. I see only one peaceful way out of this corpse of a republic and this literally bankrupt national security state. I draw your attention to Article 5 of the Constitution, this Constitution that our rulers worship but seldom heed. Article 5 describes two methods whereby the Constitution may be amended or otherwise altered. One way, and so far the only way ever taken, is by a vote of 2/3 of both houses of Congress. The amendment is then sent for ratification by the state legislatures. The second procedure is very interesting indeed. In fact, you might almost call it democratic. 2/3 of the state legislatures can request a constitutional convention, which Congress must then convene. Unlike us, the founders did not worship their handiwork. Many thought the original Constitution was bound to fail. Thomas Jefferson wanted to hold a constitutional convention every 30 years, once a generation, because, as he said, you cannot expect a man to wear a boy's jacket. As it turned out, the jacket has been so reshaped over the last 2 centuries that it is now something of a straitjacket for the people at large, and satisfying to no one except those who gain election and profits from our most peculiar system. As you know, in recent years there have been several movements to convene a constitutional convention. These have been the work of single interest groups, usually on the far right. One movement wants to forbid abortion to every woman, another wants a balanced budget embedded in the Constitution. What is interesting is that in the 1970s and 80s, 32 state legislatures voted in favor of a convention. Many of them cautiously noted that no subject other than, let's say, a balanced budget could be discussed. In 1967, Senator Sam Ervin was so intrigued by Article 5 that he thoroughly researched the subject and he explained the mechanics in Senate Bill 2307. He took the position that as we, the people, are the true de jure sovereign, we, the people, cannot be held to any single issue once we convene our convention. If we so choose, the entire Constitution could be rewritten. At this point, I part company with my friends of the ACLU, who for once are more pessimistic about our people than I. Oh, the first thing they will get rid of is the Bill of Rights, the liberals moan. To which my answer is, first, I don't think the people are suicidal. And second, what is the difference between losing those rights at an open convention rather than by gradually losing them behind the closed doors of the current Supreme Court? It is true that we are a less homogeneous and less educated people than were the 3 million original inhabitants of the 13 colonies. But I cannot believe that we are so lacking in scholars and in those devoted to the spirit of the original Constitution, and perhaps more important, the Declaration of Independence, that we will do away with our liberties while giving even greater power to the executive to fight wars that only harm us in the end. The people at large have been kept ignorant by bad schools and by the dispensers of false opinion. That is true. That is a problem. But ignorance is not stupidity. And self-interest, as both Hamilton and Madison agreed, is a great motor to the state properly checked and balanced. Of course, the manipulators will be busy at such a convention. The creative minds that gave us the Willie Horton ad will opt for some sort of apple pie fascism. But there are other voices in the land. Finally, there is a great danger facing us all, and that is the mounting fury of those who have been deprived too long of decent lives. And I promise you they will not be apathetic forever. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. Rather than be unready for anarchy, I submit that we must sit down and in an orderly way rethink our entire government as well as our place in the world. The founders' last gift to us is the machinery to set things right. Article 5. Let us use it.